when we really examine what caused the crisis, in a nutshell, if you were to go and read up on it, you might find out that having the euro made it possible for nations to borrow at close to German interest rates. If you look pre-1993 at Greek interest rates, you're talking about plus 20% for a 10-year bond. After 1993, with the Maastricht Treaty, everything pushed back lower. Everything pushed lower, and then when the euro was introduced and Greece was part of it, they were borrowing just a few basis points above German interest rates. This is true. Okay. Also, because of this influx of low interest rates, the periphery states who were kind of bound by who signed up to the Maastricht Treaty, they gave up on economic reform and started to borrow heavily. This caused bloated public sectors and real estate speculation. This is also a true factor as well. You got the Maastricht Treaty, which was really imposed by the core, France and Germany, and it was to make sure that the other nations didn't come in and behave as they supposedly have. But the problem was that France and Germany actually violated the laws themselves. So from the very offset, you've got the core implementers. They're going out there and they are just disregarding the rules, setting a bad example. And this kind of practice developed into something a bit more nefarious, where you've got countries like Greece using off-balance derivatives to hide their actual borrowings. In essence, periphery Europe, who we must remember were borrowing at really elevated rates prior to the Maastricht Treaty and Europe, they had a decade of unchecked stimulus. Now, you could look back now and you could say austerity does look like an attempt to retrospectively enforce the reform that Maastricht had hoped to instigate. This is one way of looking at the crisis, and it's a very clean cut, and it's a very kind of a perfect answer. If you had to answer a question very concisely, this could be it. But there are other questions which need to be asked, because everything seems a little bit too perfect. There were a lot of warning signs for Europe prior to this. If you look at Black Wednesday in the UK, I'm sure all of you know George Soros, very, very famous speculator. He's known around the world for his financial trading. Now he was a man who was billed as the man who beat the Bank of England, and this really came about because of the exchange rate mechanism, the ERM. Where the UK found that it was incompatible to stay within a currency, foreign exchange rate mechanism with Germany, mainly because the economies are diverse, and if the UK and Germany can't match within a mechanism of that sort, there's big question marks which have to be asked when you come to countries like Greece or the periphery states like Ireland, Spain, and whatnot. Now, interestingly, in the UK, the subject of Europe actually tore apart the Conservative government and left it in disarray, with half of the government wanting to be more pro-European and proactively engaging with Europe. The other half, for a long time, they were the much ridiculed, like fortune tellers saying, the interest rate policy is going to lead to this situation we have now. So after that point, we had almost a decade of Labour controlling the UK government. Now, this is a side issue, but I'm just giving you an idea of how prominent the protests were. This is not something which just happened overnight. Now, moving on to the next point. Previously, now, if the markets wanted to kind of make an objection or praise a government, they could do it via currency speculation. If you really protest with the way a government conducts itself, you could short a currency, or because in the past previously currencies were used by politicians as like a benchmark. If they were doing well, they could say, look at us, our currency is very strong. Now this is a bit of a problem, because it actually leads to imbalances in the economy itself. But in the post-war period, this is how things were handled by European politicians. So once you take away the currency speculation aspect, what's left? How can speculators voice their concerns? It leads to bond speculation. Now, currency speculation is one thing. Currencies can be devalued. There's many different measures which people can take, but bond speculation, which really cuts to the heart of how governments and countries are funded. They're basically taking away the security buffers, and if you're going to have inefficiencies within a unified zone like the Eurozone, they've left, like the European project left individual currencies open to attack. Again, we covered the interest rate policy effectively with the in the Eurozone. With the Euro, it meant that everyone was trading at being able to borrow at German interest rates. This was well known and documented. And again, we have the failure of the quarterly, for example. They set rules and they didn't follow them, and it gave the all clear to the periphery nations to break the rules a lot worse. Also, a final point, the history of mismanagement and default in the periphery. Just picking out Greece for an example, I think if you go back maybe 100 or 200 years, I think Greece is either between 3 or 5 times that they've defaulted on their debt. So their current behaviour is not unknown. This was not, the way the situation is presented. If you listen to President Barroso now, he'll get up and he'll say this is an exported crisis from America. This is because of the big banks. They've behaved this way, and he's suddenly exposed all the governments who are behaving well. This is not the case. All I'm trying to do in this with this slide is kind of convey that these were all well-known and documented issues with the euro well before it was launched. So if we were to skip back to the past slide and look at the textbook fairyland explanation of the crisis, and then we build in the factors here, it leads to two conclusions really. I think the first would be either these guys are incredibly stupid. I don't think that's the case, or there's another agenda here. And the other agenda kind of ties in with the second point about the elimination of currency speculation leading to bond speculation, because we hear now a lot of talk about euro bonds. Countries putting pressure on Germany for euro bonds, and Germany is, I think they're interested in the idea because it is the next step. But until they have, because of the election issues, they won't actually take that step just now. Okay, so moving on. So if we compare the Japanese situation to the European situation, you can see both modern economies are the product of post-war reconstruction and restructuring. Now, if we first look at Europe, you can see currency strength was used as a macho way for politicians to demonstrate success, but ultimately it left the economies imbalanced. The introduction of the euro saw effective currency devaluation, low borrowing costs through German interest rates, a decade of stimulus, and an explosion of government borrowing and private sector lending. Now, the debt crisis was instigated by the US subprime crisis, which was external, and gradually the ECB has lowered rates. So if you go back to the Maastricht days, if you look at the individual interest rates that everyone was paying, up until recently when the ECB just cut rates down to 0.5, everything has been lowering and lowering and lowering the whole process. Now, if we go to Japan and we look at the flip side, Japan always had a weak yen policy. And until the 1985 Plaza Accord, which they signed up to, they continued with this process. But because of the after effects where yen dramatically strengthened within a short period, the BOJ launched a massive stimulus measure. Now, the stimulus measure led to the asset bubble, which burst because the BOJ raised rates, as opposed to the ECB, who lowered rates. And they did this to prevent the economy from overheating. And then not only that, they held the rates for almost 5 years. So if you look at, when you're thinking about the question, is Europe at risk of Japanification? When you hear this in the bank reports, or you hear this mentioned by your newspaper and columnists, you have to appreciate these are two completely different situations. You have Japan, where this is an individual nation, and through mismanagement they've created this situation. Whereas in Europe, you have a concerted effort to create a superstate. And all of the problems were well known and documented. And through these tactical little inefficiencies, now the agenda, the resolution for Europe is, okay, first of all, we need to have banking union. Now we have to have euro bonds. But if you go back and look, the people of Europe historically did not want to take that step straight away, but they like the idea of the euro. So the euro as a currency unit is more of a political tool than like a financial tool. It's there as the Trojan horse to kind of get people to accept a greater political union.